Daf Yud Tes Amud Aleph, the Mishnah at the top of the Amud. Zok the Mishnah, Mol Shenimsa Bein Hashkolim Lenadova. What happens if you find money, and the money is there lying on the floor between these two shayfers, between the shayfer of the Shekalim and the shayfer of the Nadova? As we learned previously, there was 13 shayfers. So if you found the mos between these two shayfers and you don't know where it came from, did it come from the Shekalim? Is it from the shayfer, the chest that has Shekalim? So does the money, should it go to for the Shekalim for the Karbonos Tzibur of Chayva, or it should go for the Nadova, and it should go for the Karbonos which are Nadova? Now there's a general principle that we go past through the Karev. We learn out from Egla Rufa that when we have the case of the Egla Rufa, that the city that's closest to the mess, they found the mess lying. They don't know who killed this person. The city that's closest has to bring the Egla Rufa. So that we learn out from there a principle of Karev. We learn out from there that we attribute something which is closest to it. There's also a principle of Raiv. So as the Rosh speaks out, and based on the Gemara in Bava Basra, that Raiv supersedes Karev. When you attribute something to Raiv, we go Basa Raiv, we follow the majority, that's a stronger Haichacha than Karev. So when we say that by the Egla Rufa that it's a city that's closest, then we say that's when all things being equal, and the population of the two cities are the same. But if there's a greater population in one, then we say you follow the majority and you go boss for the one that has right. Similarly over here, when we're saying that we have two shayfers, so we go, if we don't know which one it came from, we go attribute it to the one that it's closest to. But similarly over here will be the same principle. That's only if there's the same amount of money in one over the other. But if one has more money than the other, then you'll go basar the raiv. So therefore, that's principle number one. Principle number two is that if we have something which is closest, we go to basar the karev. If something was equidistant and there's no way to attribute one over the other, you go lahachmir. We're machmir. So therefore, the Mishnah says as follows: if you have money lying on the ground, and it's between the two shayfers, the one that is the shayfer of the Shekalim, and the one is that Nadava is, so Karev l'Shekalim, Yipl l'Shekalim. If it's closest to the one that's Shekalim, then you put it into the Pushka Shekalim, and it goes for that purpose. L'Nadava, Yipl l'Nadava. If it's closest to the one that says Nadava, then you put it into the one of Nadava. But if it's in the middle, so you have no way to determine which one it came from, then l'nadava. We say it goes l'nadava. We're machmer, and it goes l'nadava. Now, why should it go l'nadava? Perhaps you'll say it should go to the Shekalim. The Shekalim is for a chayva, karbonos tzibur chayva. Nadava is a nadava, which is less of a maila, has less of a cheshivas than the chayva. But the reason is that because the Shekalim, if it goes to the Shekalim, then the Shekalim might end up being for the Meiser Shekalim, which only goes for the fixing of the cities, for the Chaymas a year. It doesn't go for Karbonos. Where in the Nadava, it certainly will go for the Mizbeach. Therefore, we say that it goes to the Nadava. Bein eitzim levina, similarly, if you find the coins between the two shayfers, one of the eitzim that goes to the eitzim for the maroch and one for the levina, bein eitzim levina, so we say as follows: Karev la'eitzim, yipl eitzim. If the money is closer to the shayfer of the eitzim, then you deposit it in the eitzim, levina, yipl levina. But if it's closer to the shayfer levina, it goes to the levina. Merchel l'merchel, yipl levina. If it's equidistant, then you're machmir and it goes to levina. Because levina itself is you're makriv on this be'ech, it's a carbon. The eitzim is only to be makshir, is to use the firewood for the carbon. So it goes for the levina. Similarly, ben kin legoiz le'oila. Similarly, we find the money between the shayfer that's marked kinim, which we're learning over here. Kinim means the kine chayva, which is one for an oil and one for a chatas. or the goizle oila with the pigeons of oila, which are a nadova, which are only oilas. Karav lekinim, yipul lekinim, it's closer to the kinim, goes to the kinim. Karav legoizle oila, yipul legoizle oila. Then it goes if it's closer to there. We follow the karav, and that's where it goes. Mechsa lemechsa, yipul legoizle oila. But if it's equidistant, it goes to the goizle oila, because oilas are totally consumed on the mizbeach, and the chatas is not totally consumed on the mizbeach; it's partially eaten. Bein chulin lemaisa. Similarly, if you have bein chulin lemaisa, if this is something now is the case, not in the shayfers of the Beis Hamikdash, it's talking outside the Beis Hamikdash, but they have the same principle. So if you have money, that a pile of money of chulin, and you have a pile of money of Meiser Sheni, that money that's to be used, it has a kedusha of Meiser Sheni, it has to be bought for food in Yerushalayim, tip in Yerushalayim, karav l'chulin, yiplu l'chulin. If it's closer to the pile of chulin, it goes to the chulin. If it's l'maiser sheni, yiplu l'maiser sheni. If it's closer to the maiser sheni, and then you put it in maiser sheni. Mechsa l'mechsa, yiplu l'maiser sheni. If it's mechsa mechsa, if it's equidistant, you have to be machmir, and it goes to maiser sheni. Zeh klal, this is the rule. Holchem achra korav l'hakel. You go after the closer one, and the one that's karav, that's closer, even if you're mekel. But mechsa l'mechsa l'hachmir. If it's equidistant, not one is closer than the other, then you are machmir. You go whichever one is the chumrah. So in the first case in the Mishnah, the first case in the Mishnah was if you found the money between the shayfer of the shkolim and the nidov. That's where you found it. So, frank the Gemara, la hutzcha de la bein shkolim lakinim. Well, we have the order, the seder of the shayfers. Now, the seder of the shayfers was that you had the kinim, the shayfer, the shkolim, and the next one, after you had tikkel and chadatin, tikkel and atikin, the next one were the kinim, were the birds. So why do you say that you found the money between the shkolim and the nadova? The nadova was the last one. The last 6 were for nadova. Now, if you were assuming that the shayfers were in a straight line, you had the boxes, the shayfers, they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in a row of 13. Well, then the first one are the shkolim, the taklan chidatin and atikin, the last 6 are the nadavas. Why would the money be found between the shkolim and the nadavas? It would be the example that it should be given rather is between the shkolim and the kinim. That's the one that's next to it. Why the nadavas, which are all the way at the end? So l'chera, that's the example it should give between the shkolim, and give shkolim, and between the kinim. As the Mephoshim speak out, there's no point to say that actually the first 2 are tikkel and chadatin, tikkel and atikin, but there's no point to say it's between the tikkel and chadatin and atikin, because the shkolim, even the what's destined to be of the tikkel and chadatin, when you're not makriv, ends up to be tikkel and atikin. So there would be no point to say between those 2 shayfers, because it will certainly end up with the tikkel and atikin. So rather, it should be between the shkolim and the birds, which are come after the shkolim, are the birds, the kinim. So the Gemara answers, Rav Yavin Rishim Rav Pinchas Kimin Buchlayer Ahuaisim. It was not in a straight line. The shayfers were not positioned in a straight line. If that would be the case, yes, this would not be an appropriate example. But it was in a semicircle. So therefore, the nadavas were really also next to the shkolim, because the shkolim were number 1, the nadavas were number 6 to 13. So the nadavas, or was 7 actually to 13, the nadavas were next to the shkolim, the tikkel and chadatin. It wasn't a straight line, it was in a semicircle, so then the last ones are closest to the first ones. So that's why it is an appropriate example. If it's between these 2, the shkolim and the nedovas, it goes to nedova. So, why shouldn't it say that it goes to the shkolim? Why does it go to nedova? L'chera, it should go to the shkolim. That would seem to be more appropriate because the shkolim goes for a korbanos chayvus tzibor, and the nedova is only kesem mizbeach for nedova. So the more answers is the boy Meimer Shemi Yipul Shori Lishka, because it might end up being only in the Shari Lishka, and you're not going to be makavit, you're not going to use it perhaps for korbanos. It'll be the leftovers that were used for the chayma seir, etc., which are not korbanos, and therefore rather it should go to the nedova, which will be certainly used for a korban. That's one answer. Is the boy Meimer, and someone answer, is the boy Meimer mechza mechza kimisha meis. That if it's a mechza mechza, so you don't know where it belongs, it's as if you have shkolim where after the hafrosha of the shkolim the owner died. And what do we do with shkolim that the owner died after the hafrosha? Then in that type of a case it goes to l'nadova. So this is a similar case, since we don't know where it's from, we don't know in effect who the owner is. Was it the one that deposited in the shkolim or the nedova? It's similar to that case. As we see from the following, Amar of Yasa Adanan Taman, he said, when I was in Babel, before I came to Eretz Yisrael, Shamit called Rabbi Yehuda Shal Shmuel. I heard that Rabbi Yehuda asked Shmuel, Hifresh Shekoi Meis, if a person was Mafresh a shekel, and then he died, what's the din with this money? So he died before he gave it to the gizbar, he deposited before it was deposited in the shayfras. Amalei Yipul Nadal. Says it falls to Nadava. So similarly over here, the money goes to Nadava. In a similar way, in a similar vein, Asir Saifa Shaloi, if you have the Asir Saifa of the Kohen Gadol, and you have the excess money of the Asir Saifa. The Asir Saifa was the Korban Mincha, the Kohen Gadol's makriv every day. They were chavitin. It's called a Minchas Asir, it's called Minchas Chavitin because it was made, these menachos were in a machvas, they were baked in a pan. So he brought a tenth of an ephah of the flour. They were baked into 12 loaves, 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. What happens if there's surplus money, there's excess money that was set aside for this purpose, and you have the extra money? He says it should be thrown into the Yamamelech. You can't do anything with it. But he says it falls and goes to the Nadova, and it's used for korbanos, the case of Mizbeach, when the Mizbeach is idle. So now we said, but in the Mishnah we said that if it's between the kinim and the oilus Nadova, if you find the money between the shayfa that has the kinim of chayva, let's say an isha that's a yoletus or a zava. So she has to bring a pair of birds, one for an oila, one for chatas. It's between that chest and between the next chest, which was for the oilas, the birds which are also the nedava, that's used to bring nedavas for oilas for nedava. So we say that it goes for the nedava because that the oilas are completely consumed on Mizbeach, but the pair of birds that were for the chayva, one is an oil and one is a chatas. The chatas is not totally burnt on the Mizbeach. Like the Gemara of Akasha, yesh chatas crave oila. Well, how can you say that it goes for oilas that perhaps really it came from the money that was supposed to be for a chayva, which one is a chatas? You can't convert a chatas into an oila. So how can this money be used for oilas? You're using money that was originally designated for a chatas, and you're using it for an oila. Chizki b'shem Rabbi Shimon Lakish, he says, Tanai Besan U'ala Maisra Sheyikru Oilas. In the initial hektish of it, when it was initially designated, it was designated with this Tanai, with this condition, that if in case there is a leftover of the chatas money, or if there's the money of it that cannot be used, if this money cannot be used for a chatas, then they never had a designation of a chatas, and it can be used for an oilos. So therefore, this was part of the original hektish that they can be used for an oila if it cannot be used for a chatas. So you're not converting an oila, you're not converting a chatas to an oila. It was never designated for a chatas if it can't be used for a chatas, and therefore it had the original designation in this case for an oila. So, fragt the Gemara, but still, ha'isha hazois b'ma hi miskaperes. But okay, that's fine. You've dealt with the problem of how to convert, so to speak, a chatas to an oila. But seif kol seif, if this woman had to bring her obligation, she had to bring her chayva, one for chatas, one for an oila. And now, because you're uncertain, you deposit it in the shayfer of oilas, well, she's not going to have her chatas. So she's not going to have her kapora. So how is she going to be able to have her kapora? How is she able to be eat kodshim if you're not going to be makri of her obligation for korban chatas? In case that really this money came from the shayfer of a chayva, now you're going to be makri of it for oilas. Yes, it's true that because there was a tanai, there's not a problem to be makri for an oil, because it's only all tanai. But how is she going to have her kapara? She's missing her korban chatas. Amr Yitzchak Tanai Bezdin, who we have another Tanai of Bezdin that says, Hamasapik is a kinim, Humasapik is a psulis. The one who supplies the birds, the nests for these korbanos, it's part of the condition that he has this right, this concession, so to speak. He has the right to supply the birds, but he also has an obligation that if there's a suffix, he has to supply a replacement. So therefore, when this case happens, if we have this scenario where there's a suffix, it's his obligation now to bring another pair of birds, and they bring the chatas, which is called a chatas hoif, a bal suffix. And you can bring, this is a special halacha with a chatas hoif, and normally you can't bring a chatas al suffix, but a chatas hoif is brought al suffix. So if they have this scenario, it's his obligation to bring a replacement. They bring this chatas hoif so that the woman can have kapara. The chatas cannot be eaten by the kahanim, because it's not a valid chatas, and therefore it would be the vela, they can't be eaten, the meat, it would be also for the ba'achila. So they cannot be eaten this, because perhaps it's not a valid korban, but nevertheless the isha would be able to get her kapar. Either she had a kapara from the original chatas, or either really was always an oila, and if it was a chatas, they bring a replacement one, and it's a chatas haif a bal safek. Frank the Gemara, well, why didn't the Mishnah give an additional case, an additional example? Why doesn't it give other examples with the other shayfers that you found the money between the young birds and the wood, or between the levina and the gold for the klishores? Why didn't we continue with the examples? The more answers. It's all included in the klal that said at the end of the Mishnah that when you have something that's closer to the other, you go after the car. If it's a suffix. If it's a suffix, you go lahachmer. There's no need to mention these cases. In the other cases, there was a chiddush involved over here, but there's no need to mention all the cases over here because it's included in the zaklal that the Mishnah says in the Sefer. Zok the Mishnah, other examples of sveikas. It says, if you find money in front of the animal dealers and the people who are selling animals in Yerushalayim, so it's in front of the Seichri Behema, we say, now this is a principle that we go basar the right. So most of the money that's lying over there, that in that area, is the money of Meiser Sheni. Why is that? It's that because people come to Yerushalayim, and when they come, they bring their most Meiser Sheni, the money of Meiser Sheni, which has to be used to buy food in Yerushalayim. Most of the use of the money that people buy is to buy animals for Korban Shlomim. They come to Yerushalayim, they bring their money, so in front of the Seichri Behema, most of the animals that are sold for this purpose, and therefore most of the money that's in that proximity is money that was Meiser Sheni money that the people coming to Yerushalayim are using to buy their animals and to use it and bring it as a Korban Shlomim. So most of the money in that area is the most of Meiser Sheni. Now, even though theoretically we could say, yes, that's true, but once the dealers have sold the animal and they get the money in return, that money becomes chulin. Well, you don't know if the money is from the people coming to Yerushalayim and it's most Meiser Sheni. Is it before they bought the animal, or is it money that fell from the Seicher after the purchase and it's most chulin? But there we have to be machmer. So we say most of the money over there is most Meiser Sheni, and therefore we have to treat it as most Meiser Sheni. Now, even though it's possible that this money fell from the Seicher, we're machmer and we say it's most Meiser Sheni. But if it's Baharabayas, if it's found in the Harabayas, then we say it's chulin. That money is deemed to be chulin. Now, we're not sure what that is, but in the Harabayas, most of the money, the majority of the money is chulin money. That it's most of the money that people use, and it's used generally speaking. It's not for people who are buying animals. It's money that's used throughout the whole year, and it's for general purposes. Over there, the majority of that money is chulin. And as we'll see, that most of the money is chulin, even during the Yom Tovim. But in Yerushalayim, if it's not Harbayis, it's elsewhere in Yerushalayim, B'shar Yemois HaShana chulin. If it's generally speaking during the year, we treat it as chulin, because most of the money during the course of the year is not money for korbanos, it's money for general purposes, chulin. Ubishas haregel akol meiser. But at the time of the regel, at the time of the yontav, we say that it's meiser money, because most of the money that's being used is from the people who are coming or oile regel. They bring their meiser money and they purchase with it either food or behemoths for shlomim. So most of the money that's circulating is most meiser sheni. Now, what's the difference between Harabayas and Yerushalayim? In Yerushalayim, we make a chilek between Yemois HaRegel, the time of the Yom Tovim, and the rest of the year. In Harabayas, we don't make a chilek. The difference is as follows: that in Yerushalayim, they regularly sweep the streets. They sweep the streets that it should be clean. So therefore, whenever money is found, it's deemed to be the current money that fell currently. It's not money that was from beforehand. Now, most of the money throughout the whole year is not most Meiser Sheni. It's regular chulin money that's used for general purposes. That's most of the money. However, in Yerushalayim, it's as follows. If it's during the course of the year, so the majority of the money is chulin, we treat it as chulin. But since they sweep the streets regularly, at the time of the regel, the money that was there from beforehand has been removed. So what money is there now when you find money on the streets? It's money that we assume has fallen at this time, recently. Now, this is your Meiser Regel. At the time of the Regel, most of the money is Meiser Sheni monies. Therefore, we deem it to be Meiser Sheni. But in Harabayas, they didn't sweep the streets. It was sloped, so therefore, on its own, it would have it cleaned on its own, the streets, the mud, the dirt would roll off, would be washed off. They didn't sweep the streets. The money would not necessarily fall away. So, therefore, in Harabayas, they didn't sweep the streets, even therefore on the regel, where most of the money on the regel is Meiser Sheni, but this money that's there may be money that was there from before the regel. And in totality, in general, most of the money is money that is not Meiser Sheni, is chulin. So therefore, in the Harabayas, where they didn't sweep the streets, yes, most of the money that fell during the regel is Meiser Sheni, but this money that you found, we don't know when it fell. It could be from beforehand. And most of the money throughout the year is chulin, so we treat it as chulin. As Hashem will continue with the rest of the Mishnah in the following share.